Thank you for the opportunity to be here with you. I want to share with you, first of all, that one of our goals for this conference was not only to talk about emergency services chaplaincy, but also to do some teaching, some preparation, some continuing education. And in order to meet the needs of everyone, that's kind of a challenge. Some of us have been in this a long time, some are just getting started in this. So we have some things that are maybe a little more basic, and we have some things that are a little bit more challenging. Mine's in the category of basic, okay? So we're going to catch up a little bit of time also, because otherwise Joel will take all of his time and then we'll end up missing lunch or something. I don't know. So, but what I thought we'd do today is just take a quick overview of something called psychological first aid, which many of you are familiar with the term, and I'm sure all of you are familiar with the concept in one way or another, because it's what we do as pastors and also as chaplains. We're going to look at the definition of psychological first aid and talk just a little bit. This is a section I think I can shorten quite a bit because you all are familiar with stress and stress reactions. And then we'll talk about the psychological first aid basics. And I never talk about these kinds of stress-related things without putting in a word about self-care, about taking care of ourselves. So the concept of psychological first aid, if you think about just medical first aid, what happens? Somebody gets hurt, maybe you get hurt, and it's simple, it's not a big deal, you stick a Band-Aid on it, you're done. First aid applied, problem solved. Sometimes you can't get the Band-Aid on by yourself, you got to ask somebody else to help you a little bit. Other times you apply some immediate first aid while others are coming to provide more extensive help. Psychological first aid is like that. Sometimes it's the Band-Aid, and that's all that's needed. Other times it's the first step in a much more extensive process of providing help for people. It's simply the practice of recognizing and responding to people who are in need because they're having stress reactions, and in this case we're talking about in disaster and trauma situations. So if we're going to apply first aid to people who are having stress reactions, we have to understand stress. And here's the place where I'm going to go real fast. You know what stress is. One of the definitions is it's cognitive or physical or emotional arousal. And you also know that having stress is not bad by itself. If you had no stress, you wouldn't be here today. Something stressed you to get up and get here. But experiencing excessive or prolonged stress is what the problem is. We talk about stress coming from a critical incident. And a critical incident is anything that has the power or the capability to overwhelm our normal coping skills. Everyone has normal coping skills. The people you work with as chaplains may have very high coping skills. Otherwise, they wouldn't stay in the job they're in. But every once in a while, something challenges those normal coping skills. And that results in critical incident stress. This is very basic for some of you. Let me just ask, how many of you have had some kind of like ICISF training in critical incident stress management? Oh, good. Here's where we're going to make up some time, Joel. All right. We could break down critical incident stress into things that cause physical signs and symptoms, emotional, cognitive, and a relatively new category, not to us, but a new category to ICISF, International Critical Incident Stress Foundation, is they recognize spiritual signs and symptoms also. Physical signs and symptoms, get these on the screen as fast as we can here and just take a quick look at them. When someone is under stress from a critical incident, there are all kinds of physical reactions that they may have. Things like thirst and fatigue and headaches, racing heart, shock, gastrointestinal distress, you know that's a polite word for something else. sweating, muscle tremors, chills. They also may experience emotional signs and symptoms of critical incident stress. And again, these can be they may experience some of these, they may experience many of these. Some of them will happen right away, others of them will not occur for even a couple of days or several days or a week after the exposure to the critical incident. Anger is one that we see often, and the anger is usually directed at someone who's been part of the cause of the critical incident, but at times it also can be directed inappropriately at others, like family members, things like that. And then cognitive signs and symptoms. I always like to point these out, especially to the people that we minister to. Show them that if you are experiencing an inability to concentrate because of critical incident stress, poor attention span, difficulties in problem solving, impaired decision making, you likely are a risk to yourself or someone else on a traffic stop or a structure fire or whatever. If your normal decision making and problem solving skills are diminished, you can find yourself in trouble real quickly. So it's good to be aware of that and to prepare for that. One of the categories that is relatively new in some of the literature is spiritual signs and symptoms of critical incident stress, and this I'm sure we could all expand on, but how often have we as pastors been the target of someone's anger when they were really angry at God for the situation that they were in? How often have we seen people who have lived through a difficult situation tend to withdraw from church attendance, from things like that? Or how often have we heard someone say, I just can't seem to pray anymore? These are signs and symptoms of stress. One of the things for us to note also is that stress can take on some different forms for children. It varies by each child, of course, as it does any individual, and also by age. But children are particularly sensitive to separation from their familiar surroundings and people and possessions, and from disruption of routines. Okay, well, what contributes to the factors that cause stress reactions? The characteristics of the disaster response, individual characteristics, and then a little bit about you as a disaster or trauma responder. The type of disaster, when it occurs, who's affected, what is affected, where it happens. I was just in Moore, Oklahoma over Palm Sunday weekend, just shortly after the tornado that struck there. That's not the big tornado of May 2013, but nevertheless a tornado that brought back a lot of memories for people, difficult memories. Also, talking about disaster characteristics, the tornado struck at about 6:30 in the evening on a Wednesday evening, and people were gathering for Wednesday evening worship, and the tornado seemed to form right over the church. They looked out in the parking lot, and suddenly someone said, "There's debris in the air." And nobody who lives in Moore, Oklahoma needed any further explanation of what debris in the air means. So the characteristics of the disaster had an impact on them because there they were in church. It happened right at a time when they were going to assemble for worship, and I could go through a whole list of other things that happened that also caused some concern for them. Let me just say, check the batteries in your emergency lights, because they don't do any good if they don't light when the power goes off. The day I was there, I think there were 15 of them being taken apart and serviced. So those are characteristics. Speaks to the level of preparedness. You would think when you've suffered through a giant tornado that has devastated much of your community, that as you recover, you would get better prepared. No, this kind of was an attitude of it won't happen here again, but it did. A part of disaster response is the level of preparedness. Part of it is what we have to deal with afterwards. The living situations where people have to evacuate homes or where the homes aren't even there anymore. It can even be the limited availability of food and water, and it can be delays in receiving relief or medical care, and we're certainly seeing that right now in Nepal, where it's very difficult to get into the affected areas. Individuals respond to disasters differently based on their age or their gender, their family support, cultural and ethnic and racial backgrounds do have an impact. Again, level of exposure to the disaster, the amount of injury or loss, and the amount of stress they were under to start with. And then you, as a disaster responder, be that a call out of a day as a chaplain or several days or an extended incident. Jim could talk to us about St. Louis County and what the St. Louis County Police Department has gone through the last, now, 7 months?
Since last August.
Yeah. Many times those things that affect us are things like leaving our family members, our loved ones, being in unfamiliar and challenging settings. Ever stayed in a staff shelter? It's not fun. Okay. And unfamiliar culture or ethnic populations, sometimes those whose primary language is not one that you speak. And then just listening to survivor stories. You know that. You know that as you hear other people's stories, it affects you also. And then seeing disturbing sights. And then you got to return home. And the re-entry sometimes is difficult too. So, it's good if we know some first aid. So here's psychological first aid basics. And we're going to go through each of these in a little bit of detail. We make a connection with people. We help people make sure they're safe. We're kind and calm and compassionate. We meet people's basic needs. We listen. We give realistic assurance. We encourage good coping. We help people connect. We give accurate and timely information to them. And at times we make referrals. And then our time with them is gone. We end the conversation. Oh, wait a minute. Doesn't this just sound like being a pastor? Or a chaplain? That's exactly what it is. Okay? See, I said basics. Okay, let's talk about each one of these a little bit. Presence. There isn't anybody in this room that doesn't understand presence. That's what chaplains do so often, is a ministry of presence. Well, just think it through a little bit. Don't wait to be approached. When you see someone in need, you approach them. You introduce yourself. Okay? What's the first thing you need to do as you make a connection with them? You need to make sure that people are safe. There's not anything that you're going to be able to do to comfort them if they don't feel safe. Safety is always first. That means be aware of your surroundings and enter a scene only when you're sure that it's safe. Don't go charging in until you've been advised of the safety of the situation or the hazards that you need to avoid. And then help people reach a safe place, because if they're not reaching a safe place, you're not going to be able to do much else for them. And of course, in your context, you may be the one who needs to call for medical assistance, to call 911, and then to help people to follow the emergency instructions that they're being given, because remember, they're not concentrating well, memory disruptions, things like that. You're the one that may need to help them follow directions. Then be kind and calm and compassionate. Wow, that sounds pretty basic, doesn't it? Well, it's challenging sometimes when people are difficult. You still have to be the calm, compassionate, patient one. And of course, you speak in a calm voice and you remain courteous and respectful of people, and you especially need to be aware of cultural appropriateness. In some cultures, touching, holding, hugging, things like that are not real good things to do. May not be good things to do in any culture these days, I don't know. But make eye contact, use gestures that are comforting and reassuring. And then, we're ready to start, let's sit down and talk. No, we're not ready to talk yet. We've got to meet people's basic needs first. You know the hierarchy of needs, and we have to start by getting them some food or some water if that's what they need. Again, a safe place, a shelter. You're not going to do very good providing psychological first aid if you're standing in the middle of the thunderstorm that came after the tornado. You've got to get them to a place of shelter or safety. Start making connections for them with family and friends. If they need to, encourage them to get some rest, take a break, whatever. Then we get to the part that we like to do. Then we get to listen. And of course, be attentive and listen carefully, be available to them. One of the things that as we listen and dialogue with people that we need to be sure of is that we give realistic reassurance. Don't promise something that you are not 100% assured can happen. So we need to help people feel less anxious or worried by letting them know that these kinds of feelings are understandable, but we don't want to say things like, it could have been worse, or you'll be okay in a little while. Don't give assurances that we can't promise will come true. And when we see it, we need to encourage good coping skills. If you've ever been, for example, in a shelter, there's always going to be a corner where kids are playing, and they may be playing it's in sharp contrast to what's really going on around them, but they're enjoying playing. Let them play. That's a good coping skill for them. Okay? A real important thing that we do, and you know this as chaplains, is to help people connect, to help them connect with their loved ones. Sometimes we need to suggest other ways to get communication through. Some of us who were in the Gulf after Katrina learned an important thing in an emerging technology called cell phones. They don't work after a disaster. Circuits are overloaded even if there are circuits, but we did learn something else. We learned that a lot of times a text message can get through when nothing else can. So sometimes we need to suggest to people, well, okay, the phones aren't working very well. How else could we contact this person? And you may not be aware of, but here's a little opportunity for you. In any situation, especially big disasters, the Red Cross operates as part of their website a thing called Safe and Well. And people who are family members looking for someone who might be in the disaster area can post information there, as well as people who are in the disaster area can post, and they can make connections. So sometimes that might be the best way to do that. Make sure that as you minister to people that you give them accurate and timely information. Make sure you're up on the resources and what is available to them in their setting. And some of you already are mental health professionals, so this might be a little bit different for you, but there are times when we need to make referrals, and be aware of that. And of course, you know that if someone is a threat or a danger to themselves or to others, you need to get help, make referrals. Don't let go of them until you've got them connected with a source of help. And then we end the conversation. we are not going to be in their lives very long in this situation. So we ask if there's anything else that we can do to assist them. We provide them with whatever phone numbers we can or other contact information, and we end our conversation with them. The end of our part in psychological first aid, the first step in the continuum of care for people in disasters and after traumas. Okay, but it's one thing to talk about it, you got to do it too. So model the behaviors that you teach to others. Take care of yourself also. You know what those steps are: talk, physical exercise. Remind yourself that you're having normal reactions to an abnormal situation even as you tell others. Don't fight flashbacks, they're normal. Keep yourself and your life as routine as possible. Not a great time. You know what I tell police officers when I get to this part about don't make significant life changes? I say this is not a good time to get a wife, leave a wife, get a house, get rid of a house, get a new career, change a career. And it's not a great time to make life changes. And this always brings a joke when I tell them avoid alcohol and drug use. I always modify that and say, okay, try to keep it to the normal levels that you normally do. Don't overdo. And talking is a big deal. So sharing feelings and asking how people are doing, give yourself permission to react also. And eat regularly and healthy. Okay? Stress depletes vitamins big time out of our system, so eating healthy meals gets that back. And then make decisions that restore control, and don't deal with stress all by yourself. You know, if I put or had a 300-pound box in the middle of the room here and I tried to move it by myself, that would be foolish. If I asked several of you to come and help me, that would not be a sign of weakness. It would be a sign of wisdom, for I know that the load is too big for me. So, seeking help is not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of wisdom. There are a number of places where you can get additional information about psychological first aid. The American Red Cross has a pretty good little course on that. You can check with your local Red Cross. You can take that for free or for a very nominal charge. The Red Cross has a program called Ready Rating that has a lot of helpful information on there. One I would especially encourage you to look at is the VA on their website, ptsd.va.gov. They have a little app that you can put on your phone that just gives these basics of psychological first aid, quick reminder when you're in the midst of it. Now, did I do everything I was supposed to do? And they also have a great free course, a 6-hour course on it. So obviously, in the time I've been here, I haven't taught you the whole 6-hour course. So, and International Critical Incident Stress Foundation is a good resource also for all kinds of help on dealing with stress. Okay, questions, comments? Please, Roger.
Many times I'll share 5 T's. Have you heard about that?
Mm-hmm.
Talk, tears, time, touch, and tolerance. And just to be a synopsis to people, these are things to do to take care of yourself.
Yeah, another great way to remember what you need to do in psychological first aid and caring for people. Go ahead, say it again.
Talk, tears, it's okay to cry. Time in itself does not heal all wounds. And tolerance, being tolerant of yourself as well as others, and touch. Sometimes you just need a hug and being in touch with other people.
Just also the importance of talking. You know, we like to think we can handle it ourselves, and studies have shown that emergency service personnel that have a good connection with the partners they're working with they tend to do a defusing on their own and develop fewer cases of PTSD because they are talking and taking care of themselves.
Right.
A lot of times, because of the situations that we're in, we think we're lone rangers, that we're the only one out there. But we need to have and make those connections with others that can be support to us also. Other questions or comments? Okay, we're going to take a 15-minute break.